You're watching a grey, misty and occasionally wet ride through and between two of the most beautiful of the Yorkshire Dales, Nidderdale and Wharfdale, home respectively to the River Nid and the River Wharf. To ride this route on a motorcycle, even on a cold grey day, is to experience every nuance that the British motorcycling experience has to offer. Such an experience is of course not confined to this route alone, nor even to God's own county, not even to the country as a whole. Each and every one of us has our special or favourite place in which to ride, be it the Dales, the High Peak, the Welsh Mountains, the Scottish Highlands, Ireland's wild Atlantic way, or maybe the Picos de Europa, or the volcanic majesty of the Canary Islands. My good fortune is to have been born and to live in the very landscapes which most invoking me the euphoric feelings associated with riding our bikes through the countryside, free from the shackles of everyday life and living, an escape from the madness, the insanity, the unfairness, the cruelty and the insidious and growing corruption infesting our institutions and corporations across the world. For me, riding my bike in these lands is not only palliative therapy for the soul, but also a hiding place, a bolt hole, a refuge, a safe haven from the events around us which arouse so many feelings of anger, despair and disbelief, but for the tragic believability of it all. These thoughts, though a natural response in all good people when faced with the injustices at every turn, are nonetheless corrosive, destructive, wearying. They soak away our mental well-being and are often so overwhelming that escape seems the only way forward. You know, in a world full of plastic values, false principles, gaslighting, gesture politics, spineless leaders and elites who take their vile snouts out of the trough only for the occasional purposes of showing their contempt for those ordinary people who work day in and day out just to be able to survive in a world where the lion's share of their efforts finds expression in the bank accounts of the rich and powerful. Now, this may sound like the prelude to a political diatribe, but let me assure you it's far removed from that. It's simply the observations of someone whose adult life has seen over 4 decades of a world unravelling and cascading into a dark void, where justice, fairness and plain decency have no place. It's about the dark side of human nature. Now, at the risk of turning this into a full-blown polemic, let me quickly return to the central theme: the need to escape. You see, when I ride my bike in these wild places, I'm reminded of an uncomfortable truth. Much as the therapeutic nature of the experience is appreciated, I can't help but return to those words: escape, retreat, refuge, hiding place, shelter. These are all words which describe a situation where we choose flight over fight, probably because the enemy is so big, so powerful, so seemingly omnipotent that to try and face it head on and challenge it would be to incur for us further contempt and injustice. So it is then that we take to flight on our bikes in the interests of our sanity. You know, I probably spend more time than is good for me wondering about why it is the way it is, and why these dark forces in the world seem to be in the ascendancy. And then I'm reminded of things I'd witnessed at first hand over 3 decades of policing. I don't mean the behaviour of career or opportunist criminals, that's a given. I mean the behaviour of senior people in the very institutions which exist to protect us from criminal conduct. There is no shortage of people, elevated to very senior positions in the police, whose primary motivation in all things is the advancement of their own position. This would also be true of other big organisations, both public and private, where senior appointments are all too often a manifestation of power greed rather than of noble endeavours and results. Back in the 1990s, I witnessed, together with other colleagues, an act of such blatant abuse of power by a sitting magistrate during a court hearing that it still resonates with me nearly 30 years on. The act in question almost certainly led to the public being left less safe than if justice had been allowed to take its course. No amount of protest to the powers that be had any effect. Ranks closed, and God knows how many more disgraceful acts were allowed to play out as a result by this particular individual. There are other examples of the triumph of power and ego over decency. Now, I've been watching the recent ITV dramatisation of the now infamous post office case here in the UK, whereby hundreds of sub-postmasters were wrongly accused of theft due to the flawed computerised accounting system imposed on them by the organisation. Innocent people went to prison, and in some cases took their own life as a consequence. They lost their homes, businesses and savings. Their lives were destroyed. And rather than admit how fallible the new system was, the powers that be embarked on a vicious campaign of lies and intimidation in a bid to silence hundreds of voices in order to protect corporate reputation, and thereby their own power and wealth. But thanks to one good man who chose fight over flight, we all know now of the corrupt conduct of the monsters who perpetrated these injustices against their own employees. If you haven't watched Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, I commend it to you as an insight not only into the behaviour of the Post Office, but also an example of how, as Lord Acton put it, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely throughout many of our modern institutions. And if you want absolute confirmation of the institutionalised nature of these corrupt practices, you need look no further than the Post Office's Chief Executive Officer who oversaw all of this abuse. She was honoured with a CBE. An honour which she still holds and which the establishment shows no signs of revoking, and indeed of which she shows no signs of letting go. Oh, and the ironic cream on the cake, she was also an Anglican priest when all this suffering was playing out under her watch. Hypocrisy of the very worst kind. Anyway, let's try and end on a more positive note. So regardless of the weather, the constancy and pure legitimacy of the landscape as we ride through it exists in stark contrast to the increasingly ugly face of humanity. The beneficial effects of being out in the countryside are well documented, and the benefits for mental health even more so. In that sense, we as motorcyclists are particularly blessed, given that our machines afford us not only the advantage of being able to get into the rural landscapes relatively quickly, but also the ability to engage with nature while still riding our bikes. And you don't have to own the latest adventure bike to be able to deviate a little from the tarmac. With a little due diligence, even a cruiser will negotiate the odd gravel path or stretch of grass. A pair of 50/50 tyres on a modern classic, for example, will get you access to all but the most unforgiving of terrain. And I've seen some impressive off-roading on a Royal Enfield Classic 350 with knobblies fitted. It's more about rider skill than the type of bike. Nothing more pleasing than to see an old boy in jeans on a Classic 350 outmanoeuvring the climb and rucker-clad fashion pussies as they fight to keep their 20 grand GS's and 3 grand trousers out of the shitty stuff. I sometimes wonder if they think they're on a catwalk rather than a trail. All that stood up on the bike Mick Jagger-like thrusting and pouting, hoping to induce a lump in the front of their pants, and more likely inducing a lump in the back of their pants as they lose it on the next 3-inch rut in the ground. And why is it that the GS Brigade never seem to give or return a wave or nod? A phenomenon actually observed by Henry Cole when he rode his KTM across Australia, and he got really pissed off about it. Don't blame him. It's sometimes as if only another GS rider is worthy of such a courtesy. Unless his bike is more than 3 years old, in which case he may also go unacknowledged. Okay, I'm exaggerating to a certain degree, but you get my general drift. This is of course nothing more than a bit of friendly banter, which is the hallmark of a Yorkshireman after all. We are all bike riders, whether pensioners on modern classics or slaves of Satan on choppers, desperately trying to avoid hard men driving pickup trucks with orangutan passengers. Right turn, Clyde. And it is with that final bit of imagery that I recall the wise words of Chola, leader of the hapless Black Widows, who sums up exactly my thoughts about our ruling classes in the 21st century. Why me, Lord? You made other men out of clay. Mine, you made out of shit. Al Civvy.